Welcome once again to Iraniade, and today's episode is going to be something that is frankly a little overdue. Long overdue. We're going to set up a typical terrestrial enclosure for either a juvenile or an adult. Slings don't count, different episode. Today we're going to be making an enclosure for a Brachypelma albopilosum. If you want to see how to actually make an enclosure, I do have a video on that. This is going to be just the setup, what you need to do with the substrate, the hide, so on and so on and so on. With that said, we're going to get down on the floor because can't really do a whole lot sitting in a chair. Alright, now let's go over what we're actually going to need here. First off, of course, is the enclosure. More on that here in a moment. Then, of course, we're going to need some kind of hide. I'll be using broken terracotta here, but use whatever you feel will work for you. And, of course, a water dish. I like those disposable ones. That's actually everything that's going to be going in the enclosure other than the substrate. As for you, you're going to want a straw to actually catch the spider because you're going to have to move it eventually. So want to have one of those on hand. A set of forceps. We shouldn't need them, but if we need them, they're there. And a catch cup with a lid. A catch cup in case it scurries, and then the lid for after you catch it when you're rehousing, so they don't just wander out of it. If you don't have a lid, just get a normal cup, a piece of cardboard, and something heavy to put on top to hold them down. But I've got one with a lid. We're also going to need our substrate. I do have an episode on that if you want to watch that. And water. That's for the actual water dish, of course, but given where I live, this species needs a little bit of humidity, not a whole lot, but I live in a very dry environment, so I'm going to be mixing this into the substrate as I put it in there. And that's actually it, so let's get going. Before I go any further, let's talk about the actual enclosure. Here's a little bit of a diagram. I will be using DLS, diagonal leg span, to actually measure the enclosure and the spider. The diagonal leg span is the distance from the top right foot to the bottom left foot, or vice versa. Diagonal leg span. I'm sure you can see where that name comes from. So from here on out, I won't be talking about inches or anything like that. I will be talking about diagonal leg span. So, back to the enclosure. For terrestrials specifically, in the length you want roughly 3 times diagonal leg span. For the width you want, again, roughly 2 times the diagonal leg span. Now for the height, this is the important part. Between the top of the substrate and the top of the enclosure, you don't want any more than 2 times diagonal leg span. Terrestrials will climb, and if they fall, that can cause some problems. So I say no more than 2, and frankly this spider will have about 1 times diagonal leg span. They simply don't need vertical space. They won't use it. Don't give it to them because they can hurt themselves. So for the substrate, you have a lot of options. You can go with cocoa fiber, topsoil, ground sphagnum, peat moss, vermiculite, whatever. The only things you want to avoid are any wood chips of any type of wood whatsoever, any rocks, you don't need that, no sand, and no sandpaper. Yeah, that actually happened with one that I bought on Craigslist. That sandpaper in there. Anyway, concerning your substrate, just make sure it has no cedar in it. Cedar has natural pesticides that you want to avoid. If you want something foolproof, just get cocoa fiber. As for the hide, like I said, I am using the broken terracotta pot, broken so that they're actually able to burrow if they so choose. But you can use just about anything, a pot like what I have, a cup, a half log, PVC pipe, shell, leaf, a computer fan duct, which I've done in the past, cork slab, a straw for slings if they're small enough. Whatever you want to do. Having an open bottom is ideal, and by that I mean not something like this where they can't go any further because that's a dead end. Most tarantulas won't care about that, but if they do care about it, you'll know about it pretty quickly. They'll try and burrow and they can't get any further. As for the water dish, I can't recommend this any higher. Get one that is easily removable for cleaning or in my case, get one that's just disposable. They will get slimy and stagnant and putrid very quickly. A lot of the time they will actually defecate into their water dish, after which you have to change it. So you want to make it disposable if you want something easy. A side note, this is actually an old myth. No cotton ball, no gel, none of that, just straight water. Tarantulas actually float. You can put one in a lake and they'll just kind of hover, so they can't drown. That's why I bring that up. No cotton ball, all it does is breed bacteria. Moving on, let's actually make the enclosure now. Oh, quick note, I recommend some kind of locking mechanism so that they just can't slide open. If you have kids, you may want to actually put an actual lock. However, this is good enough for any tarantula, really. So, from here, I'm just going to be shoveling in substrate. So there's that. So you're probably looking at that and saying, hey, that's a whole lot of substrate. There's barely any room at the top. You're right, there is. So what we're going to do is level that out a little bit, and we're going to be doing what's called tamping. That's not a tarantula term. That's just an English word. Tamp means to push down a little bit. Don't go crazy. You don't need to break the bottom of the glass or anything like that. Just make a little firm. This makes burrowing easier for the spider if they choose to do that, and this one might. And frankly, to me, it's more aesthetically appealing. I don't like just loose substrate, but to each his own. But concerning the spider, it makes burrowing easier. Make that nice and flat, and there we go. So that's good enough. Now, what you don't want to do with the hide is just put it on top somewhere. You don't want to do that. There's no such thing as a claustrophobic spider. So, that being said, I'm actually going to bury it down in there. Which way do I want this? How am I gonna... Yeah, like this. Having trouble with perspective here. Okay. So, just kind of stab it in there. And this goes for a half log, a cup, whatever you have going on. Stab it in there, and then kind of, with your own hand, get it out. And again, tarantulas like tight spaces. There's no such thing as a claustrophobic spider. If they need to, they can take out dirt, but unfortunately they are not smart enough to put dirt in, so you gotta do it for them. And that actually might be good enough. If she wants to go deeper, she can. Actually, I'm gonna redo this. I'm gonna move it forward a little bit. Multitasking is not my strong suit, in case you can't tell. The reason why I just moved it forward is what I keep preaching. If she decides to burrow, I just gave her a dead end right there on the glass corner. So don't want to do that. Okay. That's a lot better. Now for a little bit of extra substrate, I'm going to throw it on top of the hide. This is an aesthetic choice. I just like the look of it. You can skip this part if you want. All right. Like I said, this is not a humid species. Don't get me wrong here, it is not. In fact, for the majority of people, you keep this on bone-dry substrate. However, not for me. That's not going to work for me because of where I live. It could get away with bone-dry, but that doesn't mean it's thriving. So, frankly, just kind of pour it in. Honestly, I should have mixed it in as I was going, but I forgot. But that's the thing about substrate, it'll absorb water. Now, let's make a spot for the water dish. Anywhere will do. They'll find it. Don't worry about them finding it. You can even put it on top of the hide. I've done that a few times. The only reason I don't like putting it on top of the hide is when you go to fill it, it tends to run into their hide, and the water runs into their hide, and it freaks them out. Okay. And believe it or not, that's actually it. We're done here. If you want, you can put decorations in there. You want to keep them soft so the tarantula can't hurt themselves if they fall on it. But do know that any decorations that you put in are for your benefit, not the spiders. For a terrestrial, this is all they need. Now, this is a terrestrial that does not web really at all, unless they're eating. They simply don't spin web. However, some terrestrials do. For the terrestrials that do spin web, you're going to want to put some kind of webbing anchors in there. Actually, hold on. I'll just show you what I'm talking about. These things, barbecue skewers. These are just little bamboo skewers. I like bamboo because it doesn't mold very well. It doesn't mold very easily, I mean. And for a webber, you would just stick those in randomly just so they have something to web. Again, this species does not need that, but if you have one that does, green bottle blue would be a great example. Poke those in there so they have something to actually web, otherwise they won't be comfortable. So I do recommend doing that. However, again, species doesn't need it. And we are officially done. Let me just fill... I'm out of water, so I'm not going to be filling that water dish right now. But we're done. So here is Pretty Girl. Let's get her in there. Luckily, this is a pretty docile species, but still don't get complacent. They can bite. I like to release them right in front of their hide so that they can just scurry in there immediately. She is not a scurrier, though. She doesn't, yeah. And there she goes. See, she immediately found her hide. They like tight, dark spaces. Put your lid on. Put whatever locking mechanism you have on. And we are done. And we're actually done. That was pretty straightforward, wasn't it? Terrestrials are pretty easy to set up. Next episode I'm going to be doing arboreals. Still easy, but a little bit more complicated than that, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. As always, big shout out to arachnoboards.com. I've learned almost everything I know off of there, and I continue to learn to this day through that forum. So check it out, say hey, I'll be around. Thank you very much for watching. I've been EulersK, this has been Irani8, and I will see you next time.